What's up, Kingdom of Rock? This is Matt Gibson, and we're here today for an awesome session with Michael Melenda and our friend Bryan Talebi. How's it going, guys?
Hey, how are you? What's up, guys?
Oh, not much. Just working on tech startup today, and I'm a musician, so it's kind of like maybe sometimes you can combine those things.
Well, why don't we, Bryan? Why don't you give us a brief little overview of who you are, so our Kingdom of Rock out there. Well, then get to it, Matt.
I was getting ready to hype him.
But tell him who he is.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the most interesting man in the world, Bryan Talebi. Wait, okay, no, let me just tell you the story. So Bryan, we always botch up our intros. I think
you always botch up our intro.
I know, but it makes it interesting, or at least to me it does. Okay, so Bryan, as you guys, some of you guys know, we've been meeting in Zoom with some of the show guests, and Bryan is he's a CEO of a tech startup called Ahura AI, and they help you learn 5 to 10 times faster than if you're just doing it by yourself, right? And so we had a whole bunch of rock stars and musicians meeting in Zoom, because COVID, everybody's at home. I was like, it'd be cool if we invited my friend Bryan, who's a tech nerd, to come to the group, and we'll mix them and mingle and all that stuff. And I'm a tech nerd too, so it made a lot of sense. And so we got Bryan there, and he was telling us about the future of AI and music. And we had an entertainment lawyer, Dan Moss, there. He was talking about his investment in a company called Neural Sigma, and they had this little ADHD PTSD treatment where you have a little tech device and you put a little patch on your forehead, and it stimulates your brain and helps you with your ADHD symptoms and PTSD symptoms. And so I was hearing Bryan talk, and Dan was talking, and all these musicians were talking about being broke, which is like a pretty common discussion in today's world. And the light bulb just came on. I was like, guys, what if we're making a tech startup that has music being delivered as medicine to people that are having anxiety or depression problems? Because it sounds like Bryan's AI can tell that how they're feeling. Maybe we could use that and then send them the right music at the right time to make them feel better. And it's like drop the mic, the room just like, and everybody was like, wow, that is what we're doing. And everybody's light bulb went off, and we just started having meetings every single day and cranked it out. Bryan's built several awesome companies, and, it just turned into Neural Tunes. And here we are today. And we're doing cool things on Clubhouse. We're teaching musicians how to build tech startups as we go. And it's just a great thing. So Bryan, I think you should tell your story a little bit, because you have one.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I had a little bit of a different upbringing and different story than most people that are Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, even though I am one. So I was born as you know, Matt and Michael, I was born in a tiny village with no running water and no electricity out in the southeastern deserts of Iran. And I was extremely fortunate because the government of Iran at the time wanted to execute my whole family. So as a result, we escaped to the country into Turkey, where we lived in a refugee camp for a couple of years before getting political asylum and coming to the United States. And the reason I said I was so lucky earlier is because suddenly we had access to the American education system and access to opportunity. And so I wound up teaching myself quantum mechanics and differential equations in middle school, as one does. And I wound up starting to work at NASA as an aerospace engineer at the age of 16 at the Center.
Wait a minute, Bryan. One does. I wouldn't have taken up quantum. What actually, coming over here, escaping a horrible situation in Iran, what interested you in taking this path?
Well, mostly because I had no friends. I didn't really understand the culture. I didn't understand the language terribly well. I was in ESOL. I was learning. But I was slightly autistic, and I just I didn't really understand how to communicate with people and be heard. And so one of the things I liked about math and science is math never made fun of me. And so I just threw myself into math and science. I wound up really enjoying it. And after I wound up learning quite a bit, I wrote a couple white papers that I submitted to NASA because I wanted them to be my friends, my pen pals. And so what wound up happening is they recruited me to work on the Constellation X project for a while. So I did that up until the first couple of years of college. And in college, I decided to start my first company. So I started a company selling educational books door to door, mostly because when I was at NASA, they asked me to do a presentation to the deputy White House science advisor. And after an hour of just stuttering through a presentation, I was soaked in sweat from head to foot. There's a puddle underneath me from the sweat dripping off of me. I step off stage and my mentor looks at me and says, "Bryan, that was the worst presentation I've ever seen in my life. And this may have endangered our funding." And so I was like, man, well, this is terrible. I had this image of myself being the administrator of NASA or running a company with 40,000 engineers. And I had to take a step back and say, well, what are the skill sets that I need in order to be able to do these jobs? And of course, I needed to have the technical ability and the mathematical understanding, but I would have to be able to be persuasive. I'd have to be able to speak in public, be able to manage organizations, recruit people, lead people, and enable people to become the best versions of themselves. I realized that I could barely even talk to a girl, much less manage an organization and hire people. So I decided that I needed to get my 10,000 hours of practice in. Now, this is before Malcolm Gladwell popularized this idea in his book. My father was a psychologist, and so I used to read his psychology textbooks. So I had actually seen the studies from the 70s that showed that with 10,000 hours of actual practice, you can achieve mastery in anything. So I decided to build a company selling educational books to families in their homes. I literally went knocking on doors in the Midwest and the South. I recruited 70 other college students to do the same thing. Wow. Ran a business. By the end of college, I was making over $1 million in revenue every year, which made college very, very fun. But then I wound up starting another company in my 20s that I sold. And at that point, I had a chance to go back to Iran to visit. And of course, Iran has a bunch of big cities like Tehran and Tabriz and others. And they have skyscrapers and a tech community. But I went back to the village where I was born. And this was a fundamental moments for me. Because I ran into all the kids that I used to play with, Michael, when I was 4 or 5 years old. Mm-hmm. And now I was in my late 20s at the time, and so were they. And yet they were all illiterate. They were sheep herders and goat herders. And they spent 3 hours trying to convince me that the earth is in the center of the universe. And so that hit me like a visceral punch in the gut, because I was the same as them, right? The same ethnicity, the same background. A lot of these folks were my second, third, fourth, fifth cousins. So ostensibly we had the same genealogy, the same IQ, and same genetics. And yet we lived these radically different lives. And I realized that at that point, it just became so clear to me that access to opportunity and access to education has such a massive impact. So when I came back to the United States, I decided that I have to get into impact. I have to build companies that will positively impact lots of people. So I joined ZocDoc, worked my way up, worked under Cyrus Masumi, helped him build the company into a $1.6 billion unicorn. When I left there, I started a company called Souls, where I was the head of growth, head of sales. We used artificial intelligence to 3D print medical orthotics to democratize access to these medical devices. I worked as an executive at a series of other companies like Bizzabo. Eventually, Bizzabo became a unicorn as well. And in 2018, I took a step back and decided that I had suffered from mission creep. Whereas I wanted to help billions of people, I was at the time just an executive building big companies, making a bunch of money and making a bunch of really wealthy people more money. And I took a step back and decided, you know what? I'm going to leave my penthouse. I'm going to stop my lifestyle and I'm going to found a new company. And that is the company that Matt mentioned earlier, Ahura AI, where we invented tech that enables people to learn 3 to 5 times faster than traditional education, especially in this time where we're in the middle of the 4th industrial revolution, where we're losing 49 to 73 million jobs in the next 5 years alone in the United States. and 1 to 2 billion jobs globally. And these are all people that need to be retrained for the jobs of the future. And so we do that by hyper-personalizing learning. And so when Matt came to me and said, hey, I have this idea, why don't we, when we were in this group meeting, why don't we use this technology that you've built at Ahura to hyper-personalize music to an individual? I thought that was a brilliant idea, and why we're working together, because we can solve for the symptoms of PTSD, depression, and anxiety using music as medicine, which is absolutely brilliant. I love working with musicians and artists.
Yeah. Now, the one of the things that you mentioned, when you visited your village and you had this, punch in the gut about education, for a lot of the Kingdom of Rock community out there who are musicians, it's kind of the same thing, except rather than education, it's music. They're passionate about making music. So you were able, obviously, to find a way to develop tech startups based on your passion or your mission at that point. What advice would you give to some of the musicians out there who, they're used to playing guitar or drums or whatever, they're used to writing songs? Now you should think about maybe using those skills for something else, or to drive your passion for something else.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'm a huge believer in ikigai, which is this Japanese idea of how to achieve full meaning in life. And so ikigai suggests that there's 4 different things. There is what the world needs, what you're passionate about, what you're good at, and what can make you money. And so when you fill all of these circles into a Venn diagram, the center that connects all of them is your calling. And so for musicians who have this passion for music, we're in an amazing time right now where the market at tech companies is super frothy, which means there's a lot of dry powder. There's a lot of money being invested in early stage tech companies right now. There's a massive movement around music tech, around non-fungible tokens, around blockchain. And there are ways to leverage the musical talent that your listeners have in conjunction with a company that can solve very real problems for people and generate revenue. And so my view is always, instead of building a company that finds the best Chinese restaurant on your block, which I think there's a lot of these BS companies that don't really do anything, this is a great time to build companies that actually solve very real problems for a significant number of people. And so I would highly recommend it. Now, Elon's recommendation is, if someone has to motivate you or convince you to build a company, you shouldn't. Right? Because building a company is hard. As Elon says, it's like sitting at the precipice of a canyon, looking down into the depths of the abyss while you're chewing glass, which isn't the most appetizing description of building a company. The reality is, when you're building a company, you have the highest highs and the lowest lows. Yeah. And so you have to really want it. There has to be a passion that drives you. And if you can find that passion, then the volume gets turned down. So the lowest lows don't matter as much, because you realize, hey, this is going to pass. And the highest highs feel really good, but you also know that, you know what, shouldn't get too excited, because there's a lot more work to do. And so you can have a much more stable kind of mindset as you're building, because you're not working for the money, you're working to impact 1 billion people. And guess what? If you can impact 1 billion people, the money's going to take care of itself. And so my recommendation would be, if you can find something that you're passionate about, that you would do even if you weren't going to get paid anything, you would do in spite of the challenges and the obstacles, and find a way to generate value for a significant number of people, say 1 billion people, then go for it. And the world will pull out all the obstacles. The right people will come into your life, and it's a beautiful journey.
So let me ask you this, Bryan. So let's say I'm a musician and I was making money touring, and I had some income coming in, and it was okay. I was stable. I wasn't rich or anything. And then COVID came around and took away most of my income streams. So I've got to really hustle to make money. How do you think about dipping your toe in that and making a pivot into the tech space as a musician and building a company that can generate revenue? for you to pay for your art, maybe,
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant idea. And I think it's obviously what Matt, you and Michael did. And I think you guys did an awesome job of it. I think there are so many ways to leverage the talent that musicians have in building, becoming musicians and becoming famous and having their followers. And there's also an advantage that musicians have that most traditional tech founders don't have, which is they have a following. They have their whether they're famous or they have their fans, or even if it's 100,000 followers or 50,000 or 10,000 followers. Most tech founders, when they start, they have nobody in their corner cheering them on, which means that with that following, you can monetize that extremely effectively, and you can use that following to distribute your vision, your mission to the world much more effectively as well. And here's the other piece. Becoming a successful musician is not that dissimilar from building a tech company. You have the ups and downs. You have to believe in yourself. You have a small group of people all working together with no safety or security. You're taking the big risk. You're willing to jump off the ledge, assuming that you can build the parachute on the way down. And so that mentality, that willingness to get on stage, that willingness to fail in public and get up and do it again, that's a beautiful thing. And so I think musicians and performance artists are very well placed to enter the tech space, because look, tech is eating the world. And it's a great way to make money and create resources, but it's also a great way to have an impact. And
the other thing that I think musicians are well, skilled at is, networking, because we all have to. You're not going to get anywhere with your music if you don't know the people that can help you. And I mean, in this particular instance, just working with Matt on Kingdom of Rock, meeting you, and realizing that your technology wasn't just, playing a reverb-laden shakuhachi flute to somebody and saying, "Oh, feel better," that we're actually, serving something directly to someone that would help. But I mean, that was all really networking, for me. It's not like even if I did come up with the idea for Neural Tunes on my own. And I should mention that we also have Christian Brady of Hell Yeah, who's involved in the company as our chief artist and rep artist, so to speak. And we just brought in a pretty awesome CTO named Dakai from Hong Kong, who's going to help us. But that aside,
I think pretty awesome. Dakai is one of the recognized global experts in artificial intelligence. He was in the inaugural ethics committee that Google built for AI. He's pulled in by the United Nations and the World Economic Forum whenever they need a high-end expert to train and teach AI and explain it to world leaders and top people. So he's the guy that teaches CTOs. And the team has done an amazing job of getting him on board, which is amazing.
Yeah. We're really happy. But to end my point there, though, I mean, I feel like I was lucky because I met you. That's part of the networking thing. And you realize opportunities and you try to make them happen. If, like you, at the beginning of your career, you just have an idea and you're by yourself, or any musician out there that goes, I can see the handwriting on the wall, I should try to develop something in tech that works with music. But what's kind of the first steps you should make? I mean, like, I feel guilty because for me, I just kind of happened. It's just I bumped into you and here it is. But if I didn't have that happen, I would have to figure out how to make that happen. So
maybe
we
can
don't worry,
pretend
Michael. You'll definitely hit the lows. There will be difficult points that we'll see. So don't worry, that's coming at some point. But Matt, what were you saying?
Well, I was just going to say, let's pretend like I'm an artist that's affected by COVID. And I'll just, we'll take an idea. So I'm into guitar. So I'm a guitarist and I'm a musician. What are some ideas do you guys think of that a guitarist could work on building a tech startup, like using artificial intelligence or something like that?
But do you mind if first, though, I just get Brian's thought on my question? Because it really is about being alone for any idea. You realize that tech is happening. You're a guitar player, a keyboard player, a drummer, whatever, it doesn't matter. You don't have you don't have the lucky day of me meeting you guys,
Right.
but you want to start. So which step goes forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first idea I would have, the first thing that you do is make a decision that it's something you're going to do, right? Burn your boats, make the decision that this is on and I'm going to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're waffling, if you're a listener and you're waffling, like maybe I'll do it tomorrow, maybe I'll do it next week, you're never going to do it. It's a decision that you make. You kill off your other options and say, this is it. The second thing you do is you come up with a problem that needs to be solved that impacts a lot of people. So the best founders find a problem that they're personally dealing with, something that they have seen that's really annoying to them. And they're like, man, like, I hate this. Let's freaking solve it. And so you find that problem. And if you're a musician, there are tons of things in the music space that could be done more effectively to figure that out. Or find something that in the world that you're experiencing on a regular basis. So let me give you an example. So when ZocDoc was founded, and Cyrus Massamy was my mentor for a little while back in the day. He built a unicorn. He had been a consultant. He was traveling to San Francisco for a conference where he was speaking. And in the airplane, his eardrum popped. And so he lands in San Francisco, and he's like, man, this is really painful. This isn't good. So he goes and tries to connect with doctors on his insurance plan. And he spends 3-4 hours. He's calling down a list of doctors on his insurance plan. And he finds that the closest meeting that he can get, an appointment, is like 3-4 days away. And by that point, he's about ready to fly back. And he's like, there's got to be an easier way to do this. This is ridiculous. And he looked everywhere. There wasn't another solution. So he said, screw it. I'm going to create a solution. Right? So he created an open table for doctors where you can just go online, find anybody that has an appointment open that day or tomorrow with your insurance, and then you can get it. It's that simple. Right? YouTube was founded because someone's like, man, I wish I could watch videos online. Why do I have to wait to listen to this? Okay, just go create it, right? So that's usually the way tech works. Now, look, if you don't have a tech background, that's okay. The first thing you need to do once you come up with your idea is find a couple co-founders. Okay, find people that you can convince of your vision to come with you. So before you go try to get funding or anything like that, any investor is going to want to see, like, can you convince a couple other people to build this with you? Because if you can't convince other people to build it with you, then why should they give you capital and resources? So you go to people in your community, figure out what strengths and weaknesses you have, and find people that have strengths that are different from your strengths and cover up your weaknesses. So generally, you want a CEO that's visionary, that can see the big picture, that can see down the road, that can bring everybody together and grow it. You need a CTO, so your chief technical officer, that understands the tech behind it and can code and can build a tech team and so forth. And then you also need a COO that's very operational, that doesn't let anything fall between the cracks, that can move everything forward continuously. And so that's generally the three people you need. If you really want to, you can do it with just the CEO and the CTO. There's also a lot of options out there right now for no code. So if you want to build an app, there's all sorts of tools now online where you can just copy and paste, essentially. So you can build an app without having any technical background. So I recommend building your alpha version of your product that way. You can roll it out really quickly, and then you test it. So you make a list of 100 people, and you start going to them and say, hey, I think this is a big problem. If there was a solution for it, like, would that interest you? Would that be something you would want? Go talk to your friends, go talk to your neighbors, go talk to people, and find out if enough other people that can be convinced that this problem is, yes, in fact, a problem, and they want it fixed. From there, once you figure out that there's some kind of need in the market, that you're not just thinking, and you talk to 100 people, they all say, no, man, that's a really dumb idea. Come up with an idea that there's enough other people are like, yeah, that's actually really cool. Find the right people. And then once you find the right people to build it with, then you go to investors. And there's an entire process. You can build a deck. There's all sorts of resources online where you can build a very simple deck and go to angel investors and say, hey, this is my idea. This is a solution that we want to build. This can make a lot of money. I need X amount of money to turn this into from a vision to a reality.
And a lot of artists already have the ability to get people to pay attention to them and like them. So they already kind of have a little head start in there when you go to talk to investors. But how do you make sure that you don't look stupid when you go in there and talk to them?
So number one, as a tech guy, you have to forget about looking stupid, because you want to build something that hasn't been built before. It's just like as a musician, how do you know you won't look stupid on stage, right?
Right.
The reality, you go up there and you know what? Sometimes you are going to look stupid. That happens. No worries. You get back up and you keep going. Part of it is also preparation, right? You guys have all heard the old phrase, proper preparation prevents piss poor performance. Mm-hmm. So the way that you prevent yourself from looking dumb is by actually doing your homework. So building a deck, figuring out what is the problem that we're solving, how are we solving it, doing due diligence yourself. So what I always like to do is I like to survey. So I'll put up a really quick website. And again, you can create a website in no time just with drag and drop, right?
Yeah.
With a little page that says, hey, if you're interested, click here, right? Just a landing page. And then I go on Facebook and I put out $100 worth of ads for a customer profile that I think it will probably like the problem that we're solving.
Yeah.
And I'll say, hey, are you interested in this? And I'll pretend that we've already created it. I'll put up a bunch of ads and say, hey, if you're interested in this solution, click this link. They click the link, they put their email down, and I say, when they get to the landing page, it says, oh, by the way, this hasn't been built yet, but we're in the process of building it. Put your email address here. When it's built, we'll send you an email and let you know. You don't even need to say it's being sold. You can say it's free, whatever, it doesn't matter. But you want to see, like, are people actually going to click that link? And $100 isn't a lot of money, right? I bet every single listener goes out to a bar, well, pre-COVID, and spends way more than that, with a couple of friends. So you put $100 out to test the market. Like, will people actually click on the link? Will they say, oh, that is a problem, man, that sucks, and put their email address down? If you have enough people that do that, you're like, okay, cool. That seems like an interesting thing to solve. Now, if you don't have anybody click on it, or you have a very small number of people click on it, then that tells you one of two things. Either A, the idea is dumb, or B, you're pitching to the wrong people. Well, actually, there's three things, not two. Or three, you're pitching to the right people and the idea is good, but you're pitching to the right people in the wrong way. So you need to change your messaging around the problem and the solution. And so from there, that's data that you're collecting, right? So then what I do is a week later, I test it. So I say, okay, well, it looks like we got this result. I'm going to change the way I'm messaging the same problem to see if it increases my conversion rate. And I check that. And then the week later, I put another $100 in and I say, okay, I'm going to now switch the target audience of who I'm going after. And then the fourth week, I'll change, again, the messaging for that. So I'll A/B test a couple of things to see what works, what doesn't work. And then I have, for $400 and a month of data collection, I can then go to an investor and say, hey, I know who my ideal customer profile is. I know what kind of messaging to target. And now I have a list of a couple hundred people that have wrote down their email saying, hey, I'm interested in this. By the way, the total addressable market is this. So if it's a solution for guitar players to, I don't know, do something to enable them to learn to play faster, or to, do something where they can turn the music into fully produced art, or whatever. I'm not a musician, so I can't really tell. But if you have a solution for musicians, you can then say, okay, how many guitar players are in the world? How many guitar players would be willing to spend this money to solve this problem? And you can figure out the total addressable market in the world, or in the United States alone, that you can pursue. And then when you go to an investor, you've already done your homework. You've done your due diligence. So it's much harder to look dumb.
Okay, so let me get this straight. So I can just take an idea that I have,
or anyone,
and go test it out on a website to see if I can get people to say they're interested in it. I can take the evidence that I've collected about people's interests, put it in a PowerPoint presentation, which is the pitch deck, right? And make it look nice and professional and organized, and then I can go take that to somebody and they will just give me money to start my company.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
That's only happens in the movies, right?
So actually, it's funny. My next question was going to be, well, first off, just on Brian's point about doing research is, come on, Matt and I have been having these shows for musicians. We just had Kevin A-Tunes on last time. He does research to do his music director jobs. You got to do research no matter what you're doing, people. So if you're not going to do it, then just, I don't know. Should I just tell them to tune out? Don't look at the show if you're not going to do the research. But then some of the other things that we talk about, Bryan, it's a lot of data that you're putting out there in the world. And as Matt likes to, comment, being a fan of the Silicon Valley, comedy series, but, there's a lot of stuff that happens to those guys in that series where somebody steals an idea or somebody screws them up. And so once we have the data out there, do you protect yourself, or do you just feel like an angel is going to make it all right?
There's a lot of different opinions on this. And I have a strong opinion on it. People believe other things. I do NDAs sometimes in important situations, but realistically, most angels and most VCs are not going to sign an NDA. And I've had people come to me and be like, hey, I want you to invest in my company, but before I'll pitch it to you, sign this NDA. And I'm like, not interested. Sorry, bye.
Yeah.
The reality is that ideas are dime a dozen. Execution is all that is important. So I can't tell you how many times when I was at ZocDoc, I'd be talking to a doctor who'd be like, man, I came up with this idea 5 years ago. I came up with this idea 7 years ago. I'm like, why didn't you do it? Right? How many times have you used YouTube or Spotify and thought, man, I remember when I was younger, I thought this would be a great idea. Why the fuck didn't you do anything about it, right? None of that matters. And realistically, even patents, it is important. Once you get rolling, you should get your provisional patent and then get a real patent. It's not that hard. But realistically, if Google is going to come steal your idea, are you really going to win a lawsuit against Google? No. So what you do is you make yourself indispensable. So you build the technology, you get a lot of users, you make it such that people know your brand and use it. That's the best mode. Right. That's the best way to protect your company and your idea. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's about usage. So the classic example is Betamax versus VHS. Betamax was a much better product, significantly better, but VHS won because they were able to get more users on their platform. And so that's usually how it goes. And so I would focus more on just building. And look, one of the things Naveen Jain taught me, Naveen Jain runs the Moon Express and Viome. He's a billionaire a bunch of times over, a brilliant guy. One of the things he taught me is when you want to solve a problem, think big. Think about a big problem that you want to solve and then put it out in the world and say, hey, I want to solve this big problem. And people will come and help you. When you want to solve a big enough problem that helps enough people, that will enable other people to see that and go, man, that's a really good idea. I want to help. And then they come and help. And then you have a team of people doing it. So I'm of the opinion that, man, when you come up with an idea, put it out there. As much as you can, and then start screaming it from the mountaintops, tell people about it, tell everybody. Look, a lot of people are afraid of telling people because they say, oh, what if I tell everybody that I'm going to do this thing and it fails? Oh no, and then I'll look bad. But look, the secret is that if you're going to be an entrepreneur, and we have a great culture of this in Silicon Valley where we embrace failure. We're not just okay with it. We love it because most companies fail, and that's okay. It's better to try and fail than to sit and do nothing and just wait, or do something that doesn't awaken your spirit and your soul. The 9-to-5 job where you just drive in, well, pre-COVID, everyone's like scowling on their way to work and traffic. You show up, you have to have coffee. You're like, oh, what am I doing? Screw that. Go after your passion. Go fucking build it. Take a risk. And if you fail, at least you tried. Then on your deathbed, you can say, I tried, it didn't work. No worries. But my perspective is try it once, try it a second time, build a third company. Eventually, you're going to be successful. And so as long as you have multiple sources of income, so if you're a musician and you can sell some stuff on Spotify, do a couple other things. Matt Gibson, he was doing Uber, and I love that. Right? So our first investor at Neural Tunes, he met in an Uber. So he was driving Uber, but instead of just driving Uber randomly, he found the wealthiest part of Los Angeles, and he was like, I'm going to drive an Uber there, and I'm going to find all the wealthy people. I'm going to talk to them, and he pitched everybody, and then he changed his pitches over time based on the data he received, whether people were into it or not. That's amazing. He met me at a party in Los Angeles, and we met, we chatted, I liked him, and then I immediately forgot. And then he kept reaching out to me every month or so. And he was like, just a reminder, like, hey, I have this thing. Hey, remember, da, da, da. And then after a while, he's like, hey, come on this show. And I'm like, cool, yeah, I'd love to. Right? So find people. If you just keep telling people that you're going to do something amazing, keep telling yourself that, find a way to go after it, people will start coming on your team and wanting to help you. But you have to go to bat. You can't, nobody else is going to give you your at bats. You have to go to bat. You have to swing the bat.
And I just want to give you some props, Matt, too, because I think for musicians, you're always trying to be cool or whatever, and it is the most dorkiest thing in the world to drive an Uber, and it's even dorkier to drive an Uber and try to talk to people who probably don't want you opening your mouth. They just want to drive. You want you to drive them wherever they're going to go. But Matt was persistent and had the personality to be able to engage people. So I think a lot of people who are driving Ubers in the same situation would have said, yeah, I'm just going to drive. But we're here today because Matt just didn't drive.
But that's the thing. I actually had a pitch that I wrote and a story that I wrote on a piece of paper, and I practiced every day with every customer. And my goal was 5-star rating, know everything about the person, and make them want to hang out with me. Right. And so I think I got the only negative marks I ever got. I could tell I was going to get a negative mark when they got in the car. So it was like, you don't have to worry about that. People love to hear somebody doing well and going out there taking risk and succeeding. They love that story. And if you're that bold adventurer that pitches other people and tells them about what you're doing, you're going to get people excited. And the only thing I would warn is I followed Grant Cardone's advice. I was doing this in Roanoke, Virginia. And I don't
know if people know who Grant Cardone is, Matt.
Oh, well, I'll get to it one second. Okay. If I don't, remind me. Okay. But I was in Roanoke, Virginia, and I was pitching people in my Uber, and there's not a lot of wealth in Roanoke, Virginia. It's not a poor town, but it's not Los Angeles. And so I'd been reading Grant Cardone, who he wrote a book called The 10X Factor. And he's the guy with the 10X on the back of his jet, billionaire, jet setter, that kind of guy, sales expert. And in his book, he told me, you need to move to where the money is. So if you're going to build something, you need to go where the people and the money are. Right. And so I was like, I moved to LA. And I was like, I found out where the people are. There's 20 million people here. Where's the money? And so I was like, oh, Palos Verdes, PV, right? And so I actually just said, why drive around people that don't have any money, that can't help me and grow my company, when I can drive over there, that they need a ride too, right? And so I gave them a ride. And I had 3 billionaires in my car. I probably pitched 1,000 people the pitch, and all of them added me on Instagram, wanted to be my friend. I've got people gave me free tickets to concerts. Darren Cara, he's been on the show as in the audience. He took me to a rock concert for free, and we hung out and partied. It was great. So it was a great experience. But ultimately, if you swing the bat like Gary Vee talks all the time, how many times are you going to swing the bat? You're not going to hit the ball every time. But when you get that home run, you're going to be like, it was worth it. I struck out a bunch, and then I nailed it, right? And you're going to do it. Just go out there and swing the bat.
Exactly. Let me add it. Go ahead, Michael.
Well, go ahead. Get your point.
I was just going to add a story to this. And Matt, I love everything you just said. Look, when we came here after being in the refugee camp for a couple of years, my dad went from being a college professor in Iran to living in a refugee camp and then coming here to the United States. He barely knew the language. So he cleaned toilets in the third shift for a McDonald's. He swallowed his pride. My mom went from being a teacher in Iran to being in a refugee camp to here. She was a nanny, an au pair. not even making minimum wage because she was being paid under the table. And so then both of them worked their way back up, and my dad wound up being a college professor again. My mom wound up being a teacher again, and they both retired. And now my dad's writing a book. And so they gave me a beautiful example of, no matter where you are, just taking that next step, doing the next step, right? And so for me, when I left NASA to sell books door to door, my dad was like, "Are you high?" Because that's wild, right? In Persian culture, there's like doctor, engineer, lawyer. There's a whole bunch of other stuff, teacher, scholar, a whole bunch of other stuff, trash man. And then under trash man is a salesperson, right? So in our culture, they're like, "What are you doing?" But so think about this, selling books door to door. I was selling educational books to help kids with their homework and help parents be able to help their kids with school so they could get to college and so forth. And so I like to think of that as the human version of email spam. Mm-hmm. So if you think of the least cool thing you could possibly do, but to me, that was fantastic because I got to practice for 10,000 hours on how to really sell, how to communicate, how to get my message across. Now, are there easier ways to do it? Absolutely. Right now, you can build a business so easily using tech. Now, this is what I'm talking about was like in the early 2000s, and still tech was, a good time. I probably should have gone to Silicon Valley, but there are so many ways that you can build your own brand, your own tech. There's so many resources out there that are available. So to your point, Michael, and to your point, Matt, yeah, I mean, you got to be willing to look dumb. You got to be willing to fail. You got to be willing to get outside of your comfort zone and do something that you haven't done before, because tech is the center of everything right now. And artificial intelligence is the center of everything. But the beautiful thing is there's so many ways that you can build tech companies even without a tech background.
Yeah, well, because I don't have that kind of a tech background, but it's been interesting even working with you on Neural Tunes where, to your point, if anybody out there in the Kingdom of Rock is nervous about this, I don't know how many times Bryan has told me, dude, you can just Google that shit. and then I'll go, oh yeah, it's all up here. Whether it's, he had me, build a test app for Neural Tunes. I'd never done that before, but he goes, yeah, dude, just go to a site, Google it. And I went, nah, this isn't going to work. This is crazy talk. But all the resources were up there. So there is literally nothing to fear, actually. Even for someone like me who is more about this than and math, there are a lot of resources out there. And, you've been right every time, Bryan.
Thank you. And Michael, you did a fantastic job. You did a great job with that demo.
Now,
well, it's a paranoia.
Hey, you know what they say, paranoia will destroy you, right?
Yeah, I'm non-living proof of that, I guess. But I think also, with your story, Bryan, what's amazing about it too is with Ahura, your AI company, coming from where you're at, having to bootstrap yourself up, your parents having to bootstrap yourself up, going back to Iran and seeing not having an education, how that feeds into people's lives, good or bad. I mean, I'm not going to say all your friends back home are depressed, but they'd probably rather be a little better off than they are, I would imagine. And how you've kind of fed that back into Ahura, where you are reaching out to less fortunate communities and saying, I can help you with your education process. We can go into less fortunate areas and help people learn better and give them a fighting chance, even if they don't live in Los Angeles, United States,
Right. And on top of that, Bryan, you should talk about how Ahura helps communities with income.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was really fascinated about the reason that I just knew Bryan was the right guy is because of the ethics and integrity that he puts behind his companies. And I knew that I could trust him. I knew he cared about people. I knew he wants to do good with artificial intelligence. And there's so many ways that we have to consider how we implement things and roll them out. And Bryan does an amazing job at being the cream of the crop there. So yeah. Bryan, why don't you tell them a little bit about Ahura?
Please.
Thank you. Well, so we do sell B2B to technology to companies, so that they can upskill their employees, and instead of firing them, they can train them and move them to a different part of the company. But for every license that we sell to corporates, we give away a free license to members of underserved communities globally, especially with a diversity lens. We do that for a couple reasons. Number one, it makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside, because I want to do good things for the world. And ultimately, with rising education, you can solve so many of the global problems. Number two, in the AI world, there's a massive challenge, and Google had this problem with one of their lead ethics researchers, Timnit. And of course, Dr. Mitchell just left as a result of the fallout of that, where Google had, just to give you an example, a computer vision technology, a facial recognition technology that uses AI, and it works extremely well for white males. It works less well for females, and much more poorly for people with melanin in their skin, like myself or someone that's African American. Mm-hmm. And so the way that actually works out is when it doesn't work for people that of color, if police use this computer vision or facial recognition software to see if someone committed a crime, there's enough mistakes that happen that potentially the police could go break into the wrong person's house and arrest the wrong person, potentially shoot them. And this has actually happened. And so there's an ethical framework, an ethical question around what happens if the underlying data that you use to build your AI models only reflect a certain subset of the global population. In this situation, it only works for white males, but then less well for females and less well for others. So one of the problems I wanted to solve with this is I didn't want another AI that only works for upwardly mobile, well-off tech people in the United States. I wanted this to be a technology that worked for people across all nationalities, all backgrounds, genders, socioeconomic backgrounds, religious backgrounds, and so forth. Mm-hmm. And so by giving away half of our technology for free to people all around the world, in Africa and South America, and in slums in India, and places in Malaysia and Southeast Asia, and in refugee camps, it enables us to have a training set of data that enables our AI to work for everybody. Mm-hmm. And finally, what we realized is we could, this is after we had already rolled out, we had been building the technology and we rolled out at Harvard and so forth. I had a conversation with a gentleman by the name of Amit Pradhan, who is the president of SVBS. He also runs Jet Ventures. He's a VC, but he also runs a company, a blockchain company called Rainfall. And what they do is they were able to do a partnership with us where they can take the crazy amount of biometric data that we collect and that they can enable the user to sell that data. Now, we believe very actively that people should have agency over their own data. We disagree with companies that take people's data and exploit them for themselves. We believe that people should have absolute rights over which of their data they sell and to whom. And so we've made legally binding commitments from stage at the United Nations, at the European Commission, at the US Capitol in front of senators and representatives, and at the World Economic Forum, making our commitment very public that that's how our company works. Right. And in addition to that, we also believe that the majority of that revenue that's generated from selling that data should go back to the user. And so we've made a commitment as well that over 50% of that revenue goes back to the user. Right now, we actually give 70%. So we're over delivering on that promise. Now, we're able to generate about $200 of revenue in conjunction with Rainfall per user per month. Now, we give 70% of that back to the user. We give 15% to Rainfall and keep 15% to run the servers and pay for the company. But so that's $140 a year per month per user. Now that's not a lot for some of us, right? So that's a bottle of scotch or going out for dinner with a date on a Thursday night. Mm-hmm. But for someone making minimum wage in Detroit, making $7.25 and half of that goes to taxes, for someone in Ghana making $5 a month, or a refugee in a refugee camp in Turkey making $1 a month, $140 a month is life-changing. That pays for food and shelter and medicine and so forth, and enables them to continue learning using our platform so that they can get a job without worrying about the worms that they have. Because it turns out that if you have worms, that you can't really study, and it costs $1. The medicine for deworming costs $1, and yet that is such an issue for a person in sub-Saharan Africa, because when they're making $5 a month, that's 20% of their monthly money for one person to be dewormed. But if you make $140 per person, suddenly that's not an issue. You can have toothbrush and toothpaste, and you can have food and shelter, and suddenly you're in a place where you can actually learn and then get a job. So that's what we're doing with Ahura, to impact the world in a positive way.
Well, I also think that, I think the public kind of trained themselves just to accept this stuff. Facebook's going to use my data for this. Google's going to use my data for that. It's almost like more companies like Ahura, and I'm not trying to, shine a spotlight on Ahura, although you're doing great things. This isn't an ad for Ahura, but it's almost like more companies like yours have to say, yeah, we're going to give this money back before the public starts to realize, oh my God, what have I been doing? Why am I giving this away for free?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I've been trying to put pressure on my colleagues, other people within the tech community in Silicon Valley and otherwise, to investors, that, hey, we have a responsibility as CEOs, as investors, as VCs, and as employees of tech companies to hold ourselves to a higher standard. Look, one of my very dear friends, Joe Toscano, was involved in creating The Social Dilemma, along with Tristan Harris, who I know as well as an acquaintance. And of course, Brittany Kaiser, who did the Great Hack, a very dear friend of mine. So both Brittany Kaiser and Joe Toscano are on my ethics review board at Ahura for this reason. And I've been putting pressure on people publicly and other companies to say, hey, we need to have a real conversation around the ethics around artificial intelligence and data. We need to be very careful with what we do with people's data, and we need to get active consent from the user to use their data, and then we need to make sure they're taken care of. And I think there's a movement around that right now. There's a rising tide of anger and of knowledge amongst consumers about what's being done with their data and the fact that they should have control over it. And so I think that's going to have a pretty big impact. And look, a lot of people look at Facebook and say, oh, Facebook's too big, nothing will happen. But look, when Facebook came around, MySpace was huge.
Right.
And nobody uses MySpace anymore. It's dead. I mean, when the iPhone came out for Apple, Nokia had like 70% market share. And people forget that even companies that are at the top can fall. And right now, Facebook is having all sorts of issues. They might be split up. They might have to be forced to spin off Instagram and WhatsApp and other properties because of the improper way, an irresponsible way that they've been engaging with their consumers.
Right. So as a musician trying to build a tech startup, it sounds like a lot of stuff to think about. Like, how do you make sure you don't make like mistakes to go to jail and like crazy stuff? Like, it seems like you could mishandle somebody's data and get sued, and like, maybe I don't want to do this. That's scary. What would you say to somebody that says that?
Look, one of my old bosses, when I my first head of a growth job that I had after I left ZocDoc was a company called Souls, and my CEO then, Kegan Schoenberg, said to me, you know what? As long as we don't, and none of the executives steal money from the company, and nobody fucks one of their one of the wives or husbands or whatever of one of the other founders, we're good. Like, I would say it's really hard to go to jail as a tech founder. Just don't steal money. Don't launder money. Whenever you're making decisions, think about like, am I doing the right thing? And it's pretty obvious. So there's less of a risk of that. There's an adage about how you build a company, and it's as you're flying off a cliff, with a plane, you're building the engine on the way down, right? And so it's a little scary, but the reality is the journey of 1,000 steps begins with a single step. And all you have to do is start. So come up with your idea, find co-founders, convince a couple of your friends or other people to join on this journey with you, and you can figure everything else out. There's the other thing of like, Warren Buffett once said, if a police officer follows you for 500 miles while you're driving down the highway, he's going to find something you did wrong.
Right.
But look, it's very improbable that you'll do something so crazy that you'll go to jail. You'll get advisors, get people, read books, go online. There's so many blogs out there of people explaining every single thing you could do. Figure it out while you're building it. You don't have to have all the answers at the beginning. All you have to do is have the vision and the willingness to go all in. Everything else takes care of itself.
Yeah, and we definitely, once again, there's work there, like we said. This has been great, Bryan, by the way. It's I think hopefully it inspired a lot of people. We know out there that musicians, we write songs, we're getting screwed on streaming. We can't gig anymore, as Matt said earlier. The outlook for making money by the sweat of our creativity is low. But if you just pivot that creativity to an idea, and I think the good thing about this is, as Bryan said, it's just something you're passionate about, something that pisses you off about streaming, something that pisses you off about buying a guitar, something that pisses you off about, tuning a guitar. There are ways that you can personalize this, make it, kind of a mission, to help all musicians be better and actually hopefully make some money in the process. It's not like you're sitting around right now collecting millions of dollars of streaming revenue. So,
right.
Get off your butt. Get off your butts, everybody.
That's part of the reason at Neural Tunes, we pay artists 10x what Spotify and Apple Music pay the artist for the music that they stream on Neural Tunes, and it goes towards actually helping people with mental illness. So there is that as well. But I agree with you, Michael. Like, there's ways to find solutions.
So we are getting close to the top of the hour, and I wanted to thank everybody for watching. One thing, I did drop a link. We have a Clubhouse group. If you guys are familiar with Clubhouse, we have a Clubhouse group every Monday at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and it's called Tech Startups for Musicians and Creatives. And we have venture capitalists, angel investors, business development people, entrepreneurs, and rock stars, basically, like literal rock stars, like A-list people. So if you want to go and learn and ask questions from a panel of amazingly experienced and qualified people, I would suggest you check out the link that I just posted on all the platforms, and that'll take you to the Clubhouse event. You can add it to your calendar every Monday at 6 p.m. Bryan, I want to give you closing remarks.
Yeah, first of all, thank you guys so much for having me. This is so much fun. Also, I love the work that you guys are doing with me at Neural Tunes. We're having a lot of fun. One last thing that I'm going to tease, definitely come to Clubhouse. But one last thing I want to tease that all the details are still a little bit secret is I am working on a project with deadmau5 for a writing camp, essentially. Where musicians that are writing, that are trying to produce and so forth, can come to a mansion with 3 massive studios built in, beautiful mansion on a square kilometer of land. We have executives from labels there. We have investors there. We have musicians, producers, people that can help you record your tracks and produce the tracks. To do music videos as well. And it's a week of doing work and then also partying together, meeting amazing people. So that's a project I'm putting together. So feel free to DM me on Twitter or Instagram. And it's just at Bryan Talebi 3D on Twitter and just Bryan Talebi on Instagram. And then come to our Clubhouse and I can chat with you there as well. So that is going to be coming over the next couple of months. There will be more data around that. And then, feel free to follow me on Twitter. My DMs are open. I'm happy to chat with everybody. Again, Bryan with a Y, Bryan Talebi 3D.
And I did drop that into the comments as well. So, all right. Well, Bryan, Michael, do you have any closing comments?
No, just, thanking Bryan. I learned stuff from, you every day. And I'm just a guy who plays guitar. So everybody out there who just thinks you can't do it, that's bullshit. You can do it.
Dude.
I'm doing it. Everybody can do it. Matt's doing it. And I think that when Matt mentioned that on Clubhouse, there's a lot of famous musicians in there. Why do you think that is? because they may be famous, but they're looking to make revenue the same way
Right.
you and I are.
Right.
Stuff ain't good right now. They're looking for new avenues to build their brands, make revenue. So we are on a level playing field now with people who are more famous than us. So let's all get involved. That's all I got to say.
And let me tell you, once we're riding that unicorn with the capes on here in the next, short period of time, I don't think when Matt Gibson goes on tour that I'm going to have any problem getting that financed. I don't think the record label is going to need, I'm not going to need them, perhaps.
Well, there's that. If we all become rich, then who do we care if only one person buys our record? We're still going on tour, Who cares?
That's right. That's right.
Thanks
a private
again, Bryan,
jet.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Bryan, we know you're really busy, so thank you so much for spending an hour with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Bryan.
Goodbye, Kingdom of Rock.